Yeah, what we find out is within 3 weeks, if somebody's consistent, they'll start to notice those changes. And by 6 or 7 weeks, they're locked in. And the interesting part of it is they're not going back. We saw that again in alcohol and drug recovery. We see this in other areas, the broad spectrum of disorders that most of us as mental health therapists deal with. People can change, and they are very resilient, and they can form, as we say, new neural pathways, and they can make over their lives if they've given some key skills and then start to use them.
Welcome back. We have Dr. Gray Otis with us. We are going through his book that he has written called Key Core Beliefs. We are on chapter 2. We're excited to dive into it. If I can start out with a question, it is, what is the second fundamental of core-related health? Can you dive into that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about core-related health as having 2 basic foundations to it. And the first one is what we believe about ourselves, our key core beliefs. Mm-hmm. But the second one is what we call the integration of health. And we talk about that in the context of 5 essentials to health. Okay. 5 essentials to health. And we'll talk more about them as we get into this chapter. But we really emphasize the need that people need to pay attention to what they believe about themselves, but they also need to pay attention to how they're taking care of themselves in terms of health integration.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you go into the specifics of that? Because I'm sure there's so much that we can pull from that. So what is health integration, and how does that work?
Well, basically what we believe is that there are 5 basic essentials to how we see ourselves and how we conduct ourselves throughout our lives. We may or may not pay much attention to them, but they're still important components. And so because they are necessities, we call them the 5 heart essentials. HEART is an acronym, and it stands for health. Okay. It stands for awareness. HEART is an acronym. It stands for health. It stands for emotions, awareness, relationships, and transcendence. And we believe that all of these are absolutely crucial to living a full and enjoyable life.
And seeing that, making sure that there's balance in each one of those, it sounds like that's really fundamental to someone's happiness.
Yes.
Okay, can we go into each of those and what those look like and how that relates to our overall well-being?
Sure. Health is pretty obvious, our physical health. And it's amazing as I work with individuals that they come to me for mental or emotional issues or concerns. Right. And they don't talk very much about their health. But let me give you an example. If we don't pay attention to our sleep, and I can't tell you how many people I talk to that have maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep. Wow. That's impacting everything else. And so it's having an impact on how they're emotionally responding to things, their mental capabilities, their awareness, how they're interacting with others, their relationships, and how they're open to receiving things that are uplifting to them. And so whether it's getting enough sleep, eating good, nutritious foods, getting enough water, taking care of yourself with activities such as exercise, these all add up to a person's physical health. And like the other 4 essentials that we talked about, it interacts with all of them, as I just mentioned. And each of the others interact with health. So they're all kind of depicted in a diagram that we've included in the book. And we've always felt that not only are these essential to how we are able to navigate life in terms of physical wellness, but also emotional well-being. But it also is so crucial to what we believe about ourselves. So, for example, somebody that's kind of taking care of their health is feeling, hey, I'm healthy. Right. And that is a positive core belief.
Yeah. True.
And likewise, somebody that's not getting enough sleep, they may not have a negative core belief, but they know in some form or fashion that they're not taking care of themselves as well as they should if they were getting like 7 or 7.5 hours of sleep on average.
Interesting. And there are so many different ways that we can incorporate and better our health, and how much of an effect that has on just our emotional well-being. I think people kind of sometimes think that they're very separate, and yet our physical and emotional are so much more integrated than I think we even realize.
Yes, exactly. And the other is just as true. If we go to the second essential, which is emotions, emotions impact every other element of our life. If we feel like we're kind of successfully regulating our emotions, that we feel most of the time we're in a calm or reasonably peaceful state, well, that's impacting on our health. We've known this for years now. Medical science knows that people that have, for example, a lot of emotional anxiety, that's causing some problems in their physical health in ways that we don't fully understand yet, but it's no question that it's having an impact. Well, again, if we're in a state of being upset or distressed, that's going to impact our ability to think through things, our awareness, our ability to use our reasoning. And it's probably going to have an impact on our relationships.
Yes.
And it also kind of stunts the ability for the individual to kind of have those kind of uplifting experiences that we call transcendence. So it's a classic example, again, how one of these 5 essentials is impacting all of the other 4.
They affect all the other ones.
Yeah.
Wow.
So do you want to talk about awareness?
Yes, I'd love to hear about that.
Because we use the term awareness because it's connected to this idea that if we're not aware of something, it just doesn't exist for us. But when we have awareness, then we're able to engage what is referred to as our cognitive abilities, our ability to use reason, to kind of work through things in a sound, logical way. And it's how we learn. It's our awareness and our cognitive abilities are interrelated to virtually everything we do. And so one of the things, again, if we feel like, oh, gee, I'm just not very good at learning, then it's going to impact on our emotions. It may have a strong impact on our health. It's certainly going to have an impact on our relationships. Yeah. And again, it may kind of preclude us having those kinds of uplifting, transpiring, transcendent type of experiences that humans really need. We're very distinguished in that regard.
Wow.
So the 4th one is relationships.
Okay.
And this is a no-brainer.
Right. Right.
If the relationship with our loved ones is not going well, then we're going to have problems. And it's going to show up in our physical health because we are people that want to associate and connect with others in positive ways. And if we're not doing that, then it's going to impact our health, obviously going to have an impact on our emotions, and our ability to work through problems using our awareness and reasoning capacities. And again, it kind of precludes us having those kind of, inspiring experiences that we all need.
Right. And you can see that when even someone at the workplace is struggling in either, whether that's, a marriage relationship or whatever relationship they're in, it completely affects their, it can affect their work ability, their ability to really reason and process information, because some of those times it could be very heavy, that you're going through all these different, trials or whatnot in a relationship. So I can see how that could definitely affect multiple other aspects in a person's life.
In a sense, every aspect of a person's life.
Yeah. And we are beings of, of connection, of relationship.
Yes.
That's such a fundamental core part of human beings. And so I can see that being very important. And I don't know if a lot of people really do what it takes to really keep up on those relationships in a healthy way, really checking in and making sure with yourself and with others, really investing in relationships, making sure that they're healthy and that they're serving you,
They are so crucial. And again, all of these elements lead to our core beliefs about ourselves, but probably the most significant one is what we believe about ourselves in the context of our relationships. And we'll talk later about that because in the last part of the chapter, we talk about how to really create wonderful relationships that really work for individuals. The last element is transcendence.
Okay.
And we use that term to just say that we all want to be kind of inspired, or we want to connect in ways that maybe can't be deduced by science. Let me give you an example. I had a friend of mine that just loved nature, and his life was just not complete unless almost daily he was out just looking around, appreciating the birds. He loved all of the seasons. He wanted to be connected to the world, the earth, in a way that really made a difference for him. Other people, it might be through religion. Other people, it's through inspiring literature or good music. Yeah, all of these things play a part as to, well, why do we have art museums? Because people go to see beautiful artwork.
And it's inspiring.
It's inspiring.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So all of these things come together, and you probably have already figured out that if we take health, emotions, awareness, relationships, and transcendent by their first letter, it spells out the word heart. So the subcaption to the book, Key Core Beliefs, is unlocking the heart, all caps, of happiness and health. And that's what we talk about in terms of correlated health.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. I love hearing how it's not just one of them. It's not just another. They are all interrelated. They all affect each other. And we can't think that we can omit one and have everything else work, because it doesn't work like that. We need all of it to really thrive. It sounds like in life. It sounds like that's what you're trying to communicate so well in this book, that we need to look at all of these and assess ourselves in all of these regards to make sure we're living at the highest potential that we can.
Yes, that's exactly right. You know, we may not reach the absolute epitome of our potential or capacity. I don't think that's terribly important. But we all want to live reasonably satisfying, rewarding, worthwhile, and I like to say enjoyable lives. Yeah. And as you just said, you're exactly right. If we omit some of these, or one of these even, it has a tendency to have an impact on all of the others. And so it is worthwhile to give attention to all of these essential, we call them the heart essentials, of how to live meaningful and, well, really worthwhile and valuable lives. To kind of talk about how these heart essentials all work together, Andrea's story really kind of hits on all of these points. So Andrea was a young woman that was in a demanding job and had a really pretty challenging marriage that was kind of deteriorating. After 6 years of dealing with chronic worry, she developed a drinking problem that was getting a little bit worse. Her anxiety and drinking combined with the normal stress of a tough marketing job, and this reduced her ability to resist infections. The tipping point came when a winter cold turned into violent coughing, and a trip to an emergency room showed that she was diagnosed with viral pneumonia and was immediately hospitalized. During her second day in the hospital, Andrea's attending physician and nurse reviewed her health history and, with her permission, acquired her electronic health records. As a part of the overall evaluation, a therapist working in the hospital as a behavioral health consultant also spent some time with Andrea. Together, these three professionals then considered several factors that were contributing to Andrea's health concerns. First, Andrea's immune system was compromised. The pneumonia, as well as other viral infections, had increased over the past 3 years. In addition, in the last 12 months, she reported having a growing number of major headaches. She was also dealing with chronic distress related to her worsening relationship with her husband, Gabe. She said that they had a lot of arguments and that their fights, they often kind of withdrew from one another, and sometimes for days didn't even speak to each other. Andrea said that she regularly was the loser in these conflicts. She also expressed a significant degree of resentment towards her husband. She used drinking to cope with her chronic anxiety and depression, but it had increased considerably. 2 years ago, Andrea had a single glass of wine at dinner. Now she routinely drank 3 glasses of wine in the evenings and consumed even more on the weekends. Andrea completed a brief questionnaire that reviewed upsetting experiences during her childhood and teen years. Based on her answers, it was apparent that she had unresolved trauma relating to high school sexual harassment. This past distress was playing out in the present because she was convinced that she was a people pleaser. The negative core belief was self-evident, since she could never say no to the demands of others. All of these factors were combining to create a sense of inadequacy. When Andrea was asked to summarize her life in one sentence, she quickly replied, "I am so weak."
Wow, that is so sad. I mean, that's quite the story of how things were evolving and where she got to in life.
Andrea's story is not that unusual. And what we see, although it sometimes doesn't require hospitalization, what we see is that these heart essentials all are interplaying with each other, and in her case, is not working for her, and it's causing problems.
And a lot of them.
And a lot of them, yeah. And they all kind of intermesh together.
Right. Right. Can you tell us how this idea of comprehensive health was able to help her?
Well, the good news is in this particular hospital facility, they had this kind of combination of behavioral health and medical services. And they really went together to help Andrea work through a number of these issues. The book relates a number of the things. She eventually did get a therapist that really helped her with the past trauma. She started to focus on how she could get a better sense of herself. She paid more attention to those variables associated with her health and recognized that her emotional situation was kind of, well, almost out of control. She had arguments with her husband that, really, as we see quite often, you think back on them and say, what were we arguing about?
Yeah.
And so all of these things were addressed as Andrea decided that she really needed to make some changes. And I think one of the most important things is she took the responsibility for this on herself. She got away from blaming her husband, got away from blaming herself, and really started to focus as to how she could have a more comprehensive approach to wellness and emotional well-being. And she was successful.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? From being hospitalized and all of this, chaos that she's experiencing to then becoming, can you tell us the last of the story, the rest of her story?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the important things was her demanding job. And there were a lot of changes that were probably just not necessary. So she met with her supervisor and the fellow team members and said, let's really take a look at how these things are unfolding. Now, that is kind of nice to do and good to have, but it doesn't always work out that way. But nevertheless, just voicing her concerns and giving some possible options really results in the person feeling better about themselves, even if the job conditions don't change that much. But in this case, it did make a difference. And the supervisor said, yeah, you know what? We need to meet as a team before we make any changes and to see what we can do to make sure that it's not having as much of an impact so that we're going from one crisis to the next.
Right, right.
The other one I found that was really interesting and goes back to relationships. She really focused on moving herself into a much better position as far as how she interacted, particularly with her husband. And what happened there was that it took about 8 weeks, but she started to say to herself, hey, I'm interacting with Gabe much more successfully. And just as significantly, Gabe started to notice. And it was interesting because at first he was very reluctant to go into any kind of couples counseling.
Okay.
But he decided to join her in figuring out how they could work together more effectively as partners. Wow. And they developed some key skills that are associated with how relationships can be just amazing and terrific. Yes. And a lot of people find that very mysterious, but once it's broken down, as we'll see later in this chapter, it can really be exciting for people to figure out, oh, man, I can have great relationships, whether it be with a family member or at work or with friends. It doesn't make any difference. These relational key skills really do make a big difference.
Wow. And what a transformation in her life. Where everything was just almost spiraling down to a breaking point.
Yes.
Right? She finds herself in the hospital, and then to be able to rewrite her own key core beliefs internally, be able to, change her life around into a whole different way and invest in multiple of these spots that we're talking about as far as, the acronym of HEART. She finds herself in a totally different situation. I mean, that's really neat.
I've seen this happen over and over again. I worked for a number of years with folks in residential drug and alcohol recovery. Same thing. Wow. And, it takes a while, but if they start to really apply these important heart essentials in their life, particularly as it pertains to relationships, but to all of the others as well, it can turn people's lives around in a matter of, several weeks.
Wow. Well, most people think, if you really want to, if you have a life that is, really cratering, most people think, oh, this could take years. this could take years to rearrange or to, get back what I had or change relationships and all this stuff. And yet you're telling me that if you know what to change, if you know how to do it, and if you put in some effort, you could see changes almost immediately, and you can have big changes happen within just weeks.
Yeah. What we find out, speaking of weeks, is within 3 weeks, if somebody's consistent, they'll start to notice those changes. And by 6 or 7 weeks, they're locked in. And the interesting part of it is they're not going back. We saw that again in alcohol and drug recovery. We see this in other areas, the broad spectrum of disorders that most of us as mental health therapists deal with. People can change, and they are very resilient, and they can form, as we say, new neural pathways, and they can make over their lives if they've given some key skills and then start to use them.
Wow. I hope that gives people hope to realize that there's so much potential, no matter where you are in life, no matter what you're going through, even if you find yourself at the very bottom of whatever situation that is, there is a way to fix it, and it doesn't have to take years.
No, it doesn't have to take years. And I think, you've hit on something that's really important. If somebody really does feel discouraged, they also feel helpless. And that becomes a key core belief. Mm-hmm. I am helpless. But they're not helpless. And if they try a couple of things and consistently work at them, particularly in the context of changing their key core beliefs and combining it with better health approaches, they'll start to notice those changes within a fairly short period of time. And then, as I said, then it really becomes reinforced, strengthened, and they're not going to turn back to the old ways because that doesn't work. This does.
This does. Wow, that's amazing. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about in chapter 2?
Well, I think a couple of things that are really important to talk about is how we see changes occur. And we just briefly talk about that in how we transform key core beliefs. We've mentioned it briefly before. We'll talk about it even more as we go on through the chapters of the book. But this is so essentials because if we have a negative belief about ourselves, we can change it. But it does take a 4-step process that we need to go through. And the first one of those 4 steps is to become aware of what our negative belief is. Okay. And a lot of times we're not aware of them. We don't pay any attention to them. But if we do come to an under realization that I've got a belief, for example, I am powerless, or I'm a piece of garbage, or anything along those lines, we can come back to say, now I understand what this belief is. One of the most common ones is I'm not enough, or I'm worthless. And the most basic one, as we've talked about before, is I'm not worthy to be loved. So we have to, first off, be aware of what that negative belief is. Mm-hmm. The second one is to devise an alternative, positive core belief. It's not something that we believe in it, but it's something that we'd like to believe in. Okay. And this is kind of challenging. People can easily write down what they believe about themselves negatively, very easily. Right. But to take a positive, negative core belief and change it to a desired alternative positive core belief takes a little bit of thinking power. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. As I work with individuals, I let them kind of work through that. And sometimes it takes a minute or two, and that's okay. Yeah. But we devise that alternative and identify what we desire. Okay. That's if we don't know what we want, we'll never get there.
Yeah, it's like what are you shooting for? Yes. You got to have a goal, an aim, something that you're wanting to get to.
Exactly. Okay. And then the third step is to try and come up with something that you can do. We call it acting on it. Okay. So if we're going to have a desired belief that we'd like to have, but we don't believe it yet, well, then get that desired belief into action. Do something behaviorally to support it. It can be anything. Okay. And we'll talk about that as it plays out with Andrea. And then the fourth part of this is just to practice it. Okay. Now, we've said this many times in the book, and that is simply, this is the normal learning process.
Yes.
So I'll just give you one example. At one point, none of us could read a book.
Yeah.
And so the basic core belief is, I can't read, or I'm incapable. Mm-hmm. But we also knew that from our prior experiences, hey, I don't understand this, but maybe I can learn this. So the desired belief is, I want to be a reader. I'm a learner.
Yeah.
And then we had somebody help us understand the alphabet and words and then sentences and paragraphs.
And we practice and practice and practice.
Yeah, we acted on it first, and then we
Yes,
had to
and
practice.
practice it.
Yeah, this is no different. So in the example of Andrea with her husband, she just had this contentious belief that she had messed up. She wished she'd never married him. And that was her negative belief is, I made a mistake.
Oh.
Yeah, and she lived with that for years. But as her counselor worked with her, she said, is that way you want to live your life? And, she made that choice that, no, I want to believe something about me that I'm capable of having a good relationship with my partner. And so she came up with a positive core belief, oddly enough, was, I'm appreciative.
Oh.
But it was specifically directed at Gabe.
Oh.
And so the counselor said, well, how are you going to act on that? And she thought about that for a little bit. And then she said, well, I need to look for something good that's happened and kind of express that to him.
And don't we all need that? We
Yeah.
all need that validation.
We do.
Oh.
Yeah. And then she said, when the counselor said, well, okay, how are you going to put this into practice? She says, well, I need to do that each day. And we do know that in relationships that really work, there are at least 5 and more commonly 10 positive interactions to every negative interaction.
Yes.
So she really focused on not only being appreciative of something that she found in Gabe every day, but also having at least 5, if not many more, positive interactions with him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after a while, as you said, we all need that validation. And guess what? Gabe was lapping it up.
Oh.
But here's the interesting thing. It was having a profound impact on her. And she started to see herself in a much more positive light in terms of having the ability to understand how relationships could work better. And then we'll talk about the 5 elements of what really makes a great relationship. And you'll see how that played out with Andrea and Gabe.
Okay. Well, we're excited to jump into chapter 3. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And it's, to me, one of the most exciting elements of key core beliefs. But before we go, we just have to kind of reemphasize that core-related health is this combination of developing or replacing negative core beliefs with positive core beliefs, first off. And secondly, is also making sure that we're paying attention to all 5 of the heart essentials: health, emotions, awareness, relationships, and transcendence. And to help people kind of explore that, at the end of chapter 2, there is an incomplete review of the heart essentials, all 5 of them. And it's just kind of a way for people to kind of go through and look at just 10 different factors and
really
see how they're doing.
Themselves, right?
And it's a
really,
self-assessment. Exactly right. So that will help them reinforce what they're doing and also give them an opportunity to kind of say, maybe there's a couple of other things that I need to pay attention to. We don't use that as a checklist, and we're not trying to have people become perfect. And then, of course, the list is anything but comprehensive. Right. But it's just to help people kind of reassess, take a look at themselves and say, well, maybe there's some things that would really make a big difference for me if I just paid attention to them and gave that the attention that they need to improve either their health or their emotions or their awareness or their relationships or their transcendence.
Because then I think that's powerful, especially in the day and age that we live, that we're so busy. We're not really taking time to evaluate, to sit down, really look at each individual aspect of our life and see how we're doing, see what's working for us and what's not working for us. So I think that assessment, is really, really quite important for people to take the time to do, because then you can really see the gaps and see what you can be incorporating in your life or omitting in your life to really get that balance. So.
Precisely. And it can make a big difference.
Okay. Well, we're so grateful that you're able to deep dive into chapter 2. There's obviously so much more in the book, but we're grateful that we were able to cover all of this that we did. So we're excited to jump into chapter 3.